I'm so happy to see you. We were told you were not going to appear and simply submit written testimony, and it darkened our day.
Oh, I'm happy to be here
Proceed.
myself. Thank you, Mr.
May
Chairman.
proceed.
Thank you for that warm welcome. Mr. Ranking Member, other members of the committee, I really appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. You know, you all have reputations of being concerned about environmental restoration. We were just talking about PFAS. I'm here to talk to you today about a groundwater plume on Long Island that has contaminated our sole source drinking water aquifer for over 40 years. We've known about it for 40 years, and the Navy is a responsible party, and they can't get out of the way to actually clean it up. So I'm here to advocate for a monumental but necessary $500 million increase in funding in the Environmental Restoration Program in the Department of the Navy. This is a big thing I'm asking for. I'm asking us to really look at something that our community has struggled with for over 40 years. So this money that we're looking for is to remediate environmental degradation stemming from defense-related activities. Congressman Peter King joins me in this bipartisan request. He can't be here today because he's got a function for the St. Patrick's Day at the White House. This funding is essential for the cleanup of contamination at a defense manufacturing site in my district that, again, we've known about for over 40 years, and other similar sites across the country. During World War II and throughout the 1980s, Long Island was a defense industry manufacturing hub. Long Islanders produced the aircraft that helped lead the Allies to victory during World War II. We helped develop the propulsion technology that carried Americans into space and built the lunar module that landed on the moon. We're proud of our contributions to the nation's defense and space exploration, but for over 40 years, again, over 40 years, the pollution that was left behind has contaminated our drinking water. It's spreading rapidly. It's decreased property values, and it's spread fear throughout our communities. The United States Navy and the Grumman Corporation have long been deemed officially to be the responsible parties. We know they're the responsible parties for this contamination, and they're liable for the cleanup. Mr. Chairman, Newsday is our local daily newspaper on Long Island, and I'd like to submit for the record a recent Newsday investigative report entitled "The Grumman Plume, Decades of Deceit." The excellent reporting and frustrating details, this is relatively recent that this report came out. This excellent reporting and frustrating detail outlines decades of finger-pointing, bureaucratic delays, high-priced lawyers and engineers, and misdirection, which have resulted in a 4-decade-old problem that is a long way from actual remediation. Recently, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation released a new plan to contain further spread of an underground plume of contamination before it destroys additional drinking water supplies, again, in our sole source aquifer. Instead of a new round of finger-pointing between lawyers and engineers, Congressman King and I are advocating that the U.S. Navy and Grumman stick to their defense-related expertise and instead write a significant check, each of them, the Navy and Grumman, write significant checks to the New York State DEC and the Bethpage water districts so they can implement on a more timely remediation this spreading underground blight before it further harms our island and our people. That's why this additional funding is essential. This plume, which is one of the most complicated in the country, is currently 2.1 miles wide, 4.3 miles long, and goes as much as 900 feet deep, and has contaminated the sole source aquifer drinking water for millions of people on Long Island. To date, the remediation of the Navy Grumman Plume has concentrated on cleaning up hotspots and treating drinking water at the wellhead. There has been no plan in place to fully remediate the site, much less contain the plume. Hence, it's continued to spread. The DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation of New York State's bold plan, which includes construction of 16 wells along the perimeter, the southern perimeter of the plume, is estimated to cost $585 million over the next 30 years, and hundreds of millions of dollars more of the existing record of decision to fund the current remediation. The Navy and Grumman are going to have to pay this money. They're going to have to do it. And I'm saying instead of going through the bureaucratic mess that the Navy has to go through because they're not experts in environmental remediation, the previous Secretary of Navy agreed with me, let's just have them write a check to the local authorities so they can cut through the bureaucracy and get this site cleaned up. The Environmental Restoration Program is a Department of the Navy program initiative to identify, quote, investigate and clean up former waste disposal sites on military property. According to a Department of Defense report, the DoD anticipates that 1,852 sites will still not have achieved resolution complete by the end of fiscal year 2021, the fiscal year we're currently budgeting for, and will still require billions more to address the existing sites. Despite the present backlog, the President's budget proposal cuts this funding by $50 million to the lowest level in 4 years. That cut's unacceptable, as I'm sure you agree, especially when considering that emerging contaminants have already leading to additional sites and growing costs. I'm not going to talk about PFAS. I know other speakers have already spoken about it, but I want to advocate again how important it is for these chemical contaminants to be cleaned up. Emerging contaminants pose a significant risk to the funding for existing sites. As the DoD writes, quote, because the DoD could not plan, program, or budget for the unanticipated costs as part of the typical budget cycle, it used funding that was originally programmed for cleanup activities at other sites, like mine, that will likely lead to delays in achieving response complete at some of those deferred sites. This report goes on to state that the list of sites is not static and will grow by an average of 150 sites a year, and therefore it's unlikely that the DoD will achieve a response. We must not cut funding at this time. In fact, we need a dramatic new solution. We need your help. The people on Long Island are begging for your help. This is a bipartisan request. It's well documented. It's going on for 40 years, and only your help can help resolve this very dramatic problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I feel the gentleman's frustration, and I share it. I would suggest there's probably not another member in the House who has more Superfund sites, more contaminated waterways, and other environmental problems in the 1st District of Indiana. I live in Gary, Indiana. We have the Grand Calumet River, which is not grand, but it's a river. And for 100 years, 90% of the water in that river was industrial discharge from 5 refineries and 4 integrated steel mills. As a member of congressional staff for 6 years and as a member for 36 years, we've been trying just to clean up that one site. We've made progress, but we still have 4 reaches of the river to go. And I absolutely appreciate your frustration. I also appreciate your activity because you had an amendment that was adopted in the House and we were able to retain fiscal year 18 on this issue, and would point out, and it's of little consolation to you at this moment, that for the current fiscal year, we increased the administration's request for that account by $49 million. These are problems, as you point out on page 5, the movement of money because we can't plan and we're going to take money from your account just isn't going to solve the problem you got. So none of us can promise you anything, but
Mr. Chairman, let me just say very clearly,
I
appreciate
so
much how much you know about this and how passionate you are about this idea of cleanup as well. One of my staffers is one of your former staffers. They've told me about your commitment to this. I've read about your commitment to this, and we're so grateful for the great work that you've done throughout your career on environmental remediation. I just want to point out one thing. The responsible parties here are one of the major contractors in America, the Grumman Corporation, and 2, that we send contracts to on a regular basis, and number 2, the United States of America Department of the Navy. They're the responsible party for this cleanup. It's been there for 40 years, and it's not a question of the technology. It's a question of going through the bureaucracy of just getting this thing approved. I want to get it off of the Navy's back, write a check to the local authorities, and have them just go clean it up, because you know as well as I do how awful the bureaucracy of the federal government is. It's not because people are bad. It's not because they're incompetent. It's not because they're mean-spirited. It's not because they don't care. It's just an awful, terrible bureaucracy they have to go through. And if we could just get this money and give it to the local authorities, they could get this done, and more people would not suffer from this site for which the country is responsible for.
Well, I certainly hear the gentleman's passion on this issue. Unfortunately, we have hundreds of these sites, legacy sites, primarily from World War II, that have various pollutants. We certainly have them in California. We have them across the nation. And it's going to cost us billions and billions of dollars. We had a hearing yesterday, Energy and Water, on sites in Idaho and the state of Washington where when we did the Manhattan Project, we were in a hurry. And we have remediation that we're doing in various locations that's going to cost significant amount of resources. I just bring up the other issue too on technology. A lot of these sites, we use pump and treat, pump and treat, pump and treat. It takes 30 years, like you just pointed out. We're using microbial technology now in certain areas that have been hugely successful. I would encourage to look at those types of technologies. I don't know the sites specifically, so I can't opine on that, but it has worked. It cleans it up rapidly. So that's what we need to do. We need to change our mindset to get these sites cleaned up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman, let me just point out one thing, if I can, just to make a distinction here. Unlike a lot of the other sites throughout the nation, this is the sole source drinking water supply for this area, because we take our drinking water straight from the groundwater. And it's a heavily populated area. So it's not a remote facility. It's in the middle of people's neighborhood. It was literally, one of the sites was a park that was closed down. And this is where we drill right into the ground that's contaminated and pull the water out of there. And this has been going on. We've known about it for 40 years. And I know we've known about other sites for 40 years, but this is, again, in the middle of densely populated areas with drinking water right there.
We will do our very best.
I appreciate it
Thank
so
you
much,
very
Mr. Chairman.
much.
Thank you so much.